Frances Merrow knelt at the foot of a grand piano in the finest ballroom in Bath, a brass tuning hammer in her hand, while 200 people stepped over her skirts to reach the punch. She had been sent up the servants' stair. She did not colour. A gentleman passing paused, took a shilling from his waistcoat and dropped it on the closed lid of the instrument, as if he were tipping a porter at a coaching inn. It rang once on the rosewood. She let it lie. Then Mr. Giles Ashworth, young and pleased with himself, said to the laughter of his friends, "Play us something jolly when you've finished. There's a good girl." And Mrs. Draycott, the hostess, the woman whose evening this was, told her, "Be quick. 40 couples are waiting to dance." Frances hummed a phrase, low, to test the middle strings. 4 bars, no more. And the band's second violin, a working man named Pell, lowered his bow and stared at her across the floor. "Madam," he said, "where did you learn that? If your work was ever praised in a room that never once learned your name, this story is for you." Before we go on, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to the beginning of that night, because it starts long before the laughter. Frances Merrow was 31 years old. She was a piano tuner for Osgood and Hale, the pianoforte makers of Milsom Street, and she was, by any honest measure, the best set of ears the trade had. That was not vanity. It was simply true, and she had learned it the way you learn the sound of your own name. Her father had taught her. He had been a tuner too. A quiet man with square hands, and he could hear a false fifth across a crowded room while 3 other men were talking. He used to close his eyes when he worked. He said the eyes only got in the way of the ears. When Frances was 9 years old, he set a brass tuning hammer in her small hand, closed her fingers around it, and held them there until she stopped shaking. "Feel the pin," he told her. "Don't turn it. Persuade it." She never forgot the weight of his hands over hers. The hammer in her satchel that night was the same one. The brass had gone soft and warm at the grip from 40 years of 2 people's palms. She carried a satchel of worn leather, and she let no footman touch it. That was a small thing, and people thought it a servant's pride. But it was not pride. Inside were her felts, her mutes, her forks, and her hammer, and a fork tuned to A that her father had filed by hand until it sang the note he wanted, a shade brighter than the London standard. She still tuned to his A. She always would. By day she gave voice to the tone of pianos that other people would sit down at and be praised. She would spend 6 hours coaxing a dull instrument into brilliance, and then some young lady in a good dress would play 3 simple airs on it, and the room would sigh and say how gifted she was. Frances had made her peace with that. Or she thought she had. Because there was another thing she did, and it was the thing she never spoke of. Frances wrote music. At night, in her rented room above a chandler's shop, by a single candle, with the day's work aching in her wrists, she wrote waltzes. She had been doing it since she was a girl. It came to her the way water finds a crack. She could not have stopped it if she had tried, and once, long ago, she had tried. That evening she arrived at the Cavendish Assembly Rooms by the tradesman's entrance at the back, as she always did, and a housekeeper in black bombazine looked her up and down and sent her to wait in a passage that smelled of tallow and cold stone. Frances waited. She was good at waiting. Through the wall she could hear the great room filling. The rustle and murmur of the county arriving in its silk, the small orchestra warming up in fragments. She knew that band. Everard Lowndes' band, the best that could be hired between Bristol and Salisbury. She had tuned for them before, though none of them had ever once asked her name. A footman came and told her to go up. There was a chair in the passage where she had set her things, and on the seat of the chair someone had left a programme card for the evening. Cream card, good printing, gilt at the edge. Frances picked it up because it was in her way, and then she stood very still. 3 waltzes. A set of quadrilles. printed neat down the middle of the card in a fine engraved hand, the music of our Harcourt, something crossed her face. Just once. A flinch, quick as a struck string, there and then gone. She set the card back down on the chair, exactly where it had been, squared it to the edge with one finger, and picked up her satchel. She said nothing. There was no one to say it to. She went up the stair. The stair she was sent up was the servants' stair, narrow and dark and turning, and it let her out through a small door beside the great fireplace at the end of the ballroom. She came out low and to the side, the way the help comes out, and for a moment before anyone noticed her, she simply looked at the room. It was a beautiful room. She would give it that. 3 great chandeliers, every candle lit, the wax dripping slow and the light swimming in the tall mirrors down one wall so that the crowd seemed twice as large. The floor was chalked in pale swirls for the dancing, and everywhere, in every direction, the county of Somerset in its finest, 200 of them at least, the men in dark blue and black, the women in white and rose and gold, all of it moving and glittering and loud with the particular noise a room makes when everyone in it is certain they belong. At the far end stood the grand piano, and the housekeeper had been right about one thing, at least. It was in trouble. Frances knew it before she touched it. She could see the trouble from across the room. The instrument had been carted in from somewhere and left standing near the window, and the window had been open half the day in October, and the damp had got into it the way damp always did. She crossed the floor with her satchel, and the housekeeper met her by the piano and pressed something into her hands with a look of great put-upon patience. A spare pin-block, wrapped in cloth. "Mr. Lowndes says the treble won't hold," the woman said. "See to it. Quick as you can, they'll want to dance by 9. And she was gone. Frances set the pin-block down. She set her satchel beside the piano leg, and she opened it, and she took out her felts and her mutes and her forks and her hammer, and she laid them in their order on a folded cloth on the floor. In her satchel, beside the felts and the hammer, there was a bundle of ruled paper she never spoke of. Old working sheets she had simply never thrown away. She moved it aside to reach the second fork, and she did not look at it, and she thought nothing of it at all. It was only paper. She had carried it so long she had stopped feeling its weight. She took what she needed and left the rest, and she knelt down at the foot of the great instrument to begin. That was the posture the room would remember her in. On her knees at the pedal lyre, her plain grey skirts spread on the chalked floor, her sleeves turned back off her wrists, the brass hammer in her hand. Below the eye-line of every person there, a woman doing work with her hands, at the ankle height of 100 dancing shoes. She lifted the lid and looked inside, and she winced, quietly, at what the damp had done. It was while she was setting her first mutes that the gentleman dropped the shilling. He did not do it unkindly. That was almost the worst of it. He did it the way a man throws a coin to a boy who has held his horse, without cruelty and without thought, because to him she was a function and not a person. He was passing with 2 others, deep in some story, and he saw the woman working at the piano, and his hand went to his pocket by pure reflex, and the shilling landed on the closed part of the lid with a small bright ring, and slid an inch, and stopped. He never broke his sentence. He never looked at her face. He was gone into the crowd before the coin had stopped moving. Frances looked at the shilling for a moment. Then she moved it, gently, with 2 fingers, to the corner of the lid where it would not buzz against the strings, and she went back to her mutes. She would leave it there. She would not put it in her pocket, and she would not throw it down. It could sit and watch her work. That was answer enough, and it cost her nothing. She was into the middle octave, seating the pins, when Ashworth found her. He was the sort of young man every county has a few of, well-made, well-dressed, quick with his tongue and slow with his heart, and surrounded always by a little weather of laughing friends who fed on him and whom he fed. He had drink in him, but not too much. He stopped by the piano with his glass and looked down at her the way you look at a curiosity. And his friends stopped with him because he was the one they followed. "Now here's a thing," he said, pitched to Carrie. "A lady mechanic. Tell me, do you play as well as you poke about in there?" Frances answered without looking up, her voice level and unhurried. "I don't play for company, sir, only to hear whether the note's true." "Only to hear whether the note's true," he repeated, delighted to his friends, as though she had performed a trick. They laughed. He leaned an inch closer, warming to his own performance. "Well then, play us something jolly when you've finished. There's a good girl. Something we can dance to. I'm sure a clever creature like you can manage a tune." There it was. Good girl. She was 31 years old, and she had forgotten more about music than every soul in that room would ever learn, and to him she was a good girl, the way a dog is a good dog when it fetches. She sat back on her heels for a moment and looked at him. Not angrily. She had long ago spent the anger that this sort of thing used to raise in her. She looked at him the way you look at weather. "I'll do my best to leave it in tune for you, sir," she said. "That's the jolliest thing I can offer a piano in this state." And she turned back to the strings. It was a mild answer, and it slid off him without leaving a mark, and he took his laughter away with him, pleased. But as he went, Frances did a small thing. She had a note to check, a note in the middle of the keyboard that had gone sour. And to check it she played it, and then she played the notes around it, 4 bars of a simple falling phrase, soft, almost under her breath, the way a tuner tries the temper of an octave. And across the room, at the band's end, a man in a plain black coat who had been rubbing rosin into his bow went very still and lifted his head and looked at her. His name was Thomas Pell, and he was the second violin, and he had been a jobbing musician for 20 years. He had copied out more parts by candlelight than he could count, and something in those 4 soft bars had reached across the whole loud length of the room and taken hold of him by the back of the neck. He did not know why. Not yet. He only knew he had heard that phrase before, in his own hands 100 times, and never once from a kneeling woman at the foot of a piano. He watched her for a long moment. Then someone spoke to him, and he lost her in the crowd, and he told himself he had imagined it. Frances had not noticed him at all. She had a piano to save, and the piano was worse than she had feared. The damp had done its full work. When she went string by string across the whole compass, she found the truth of it. The wound strings in the bass had gone dull and flat, the copper sweating, the core slack. Worse, in the tenor there was one pin, a single pin, that would not hold its ground. She would set it, and it would sing true for a minute, and then it would creep, the note sagging out from under itself like a floorboard giving way. A loose pin in a damp block. Every tuner's small nightmare. You cannot simply crank it tighter. Crank it, and you split the block or you strip the hole, and then the note is gone for good, and there is no music cellar in Bath open at 9 at night to sell you another. So she did it the slow way, the way her father had shown her. She persuaded it. She backed the pin off a hair and brought it up onto the note from below, so the string's own pull would help hold it in place, and she seated it with a tap, and she waited, and she listened, and when it crept, she began again, patient as stone. 3 times. 4. Around her the room roared on, and no one saw that a small quiet war was being won on the floor. And then there was the temperament itself, which was the real work, the work no one in that room could have named. Because a piano cannot be made perfectly in tune. That is a thing most people never learn and would not believe if you told them. The mathematics of it will not close. If you tune every fifth pure and true, the way the ear first wants, you go round the whole keyboard and you come back a hair sharp, and the last interval howls like a cat. So you cheat, you spread the error. You make every fifth a whisper flat, so small no untrained ear can catch it, and you share the wrongness out evenly across all 12 notes so that no single chord suffers, and the instrument can play in any key without screaming. Equal temperament, the trade was coming to call it. It is a compromise. It is a beautiful, invisible compromise, and setting it by ear alone, no machine, only forks and a memory of intervals, is the whole art of the thing. Frances laid it in that piano the way you lay a foundation, and she killed, one by one, the sour fifths the last careless man had left in it, and she did it kneeling on a chalked floor while the shilling watched from the corner of the lid. It took her the better part of an hour, and it was, though not one guest could have told you so, the finest single piece of craftsmanship performed in that building all evening. She was nearly done when the damp beat her one last time, and that was when Mrs. Draycott came. The bass had drifted again, all of it together, the whole instrument settling flat under the wet air faster than she could hold it, and Frances knew she would have to go back over the low end one more time. And of course that was the moment the hostess chose. The sets were forming on the floor. The couples were finding their places, 40 of them, the women's gloved hands coming up onto the men's, everyone turning toward the band, everyone waiting for the first note. And the piano was not ready, and Mrs. Cordelia Draycott swept up to it, with a small hard knot of her particular friends at her shoulder, and she looked down at the kneeling woman, and she pitched her voice so that all of them could enjoy it. "Are we to wait all night on this creature? Be quick, woman, you are keeping the county waiting. I did not open my rooms to watch a servant fiddle with wires while my guests stand about like fence posts." A ripple of amusement from the knot behind her. "Really, one would think you were building the thing, not tuning it. And here is the picture. Hold it in your mind. Frances Merrow on her knees at the pedal lyre of a grand piano, the brass hammer raised in her hand, her wrists bare, her face level, and above her a whole low sky of silk and jewels and candlelight and soft, cruel laughter, 200 people who had never learned her name, and the woman who owned the evening standing over her telling her to be quick. The help at the bottom. The county at the top. And not one of them, not a single soul in that glittering room, with the first idea of what was about to happen to them. Frances did not stand. She did not argue. She looked up at Mrs. Draycott, and she said, evenly, "Another few minutes, madam, and it will hold true all night. Send it out now and it will sag before your second dance, and they'll say your instrument was sour," which was the one argument that could reach a woman like that, because it spoke to her evening and not to Frances's dignity. Mrs. Draycott's mouth tightened. But she had heard the sense in it, and she gave a small, furious wave of her fan and turned away to reassure her guests, and Frances bent back to the strings. She had one string in the bass to seat, and to hear it truly against its neighbours she hummed the interval, low in her throat, to hold the pitch in her mind while she turned the pin. It was the phrase again, the same falling figure. It rose out of her without thought, the way you hum the thing that lives in you, and she seated the string against it, and it came true and sweet at last, and held. And Thomas Pell was there. Closer now, he had drifted the length of the room without quite letting himself know he was doing it, and he stood not 6 feet from her, and he had heard it plain this time, over all the noise, the whole phrase in her own voice, and the blood had gone out of his face. "Madam," he said. Quiet, urgent, almost frightened. "Where did you learn that phrase?" Frances glanced up. She saw a working man in a plain coat, a fiddle player, and she did not understand the look on his face, and she had a piano to finish. "It's only a bit of a tune, sir," she said. "It helps me hold the note." "No," he said. "No, I know that tune. I have played that tune." "Where did you?" But a gentleman near them laughed, loud, at something else entirely. And a lady said, "Are we dancing or aren't we?" And the moment broke and washed away, and Pell was jostled back a step, and someone called his name from the band, and he had to go. He went backward, watching her, and Frances had already forgotten him. She wiped her hammer on the cloth and set it down. The piano was done. It was, when she had finished with it, a different instrument. She struck a full chord low in the bass and let it ring up through the whole frame, and it was round and true and warm, no wolf in it anywhere, every note sitting in its place like a stone in a wall. She closed the lid over the strings, gently, and moved the shilling to one side, and she rose from her knees at last, stiff from the floor, and stepped back to let the music begin. Lound, the leader, came to the piano to take the pitch from her, because that is how it is done. The whole band tunes to the piano, and the piano tunes to the tuner. He gave her a short nod, the first courtesy anyone had shown her all night, and he set his bow to his lead violin, and she gave him the A. Her father's A, a shade bright, and Lound tuned to it, and turned, and gave it to the band, and one by one the fiddles and the flute and the cello leaned into it, and the whole small orchestra bloomed into tune around the note her father had filed by hand 30 years before. The entire music of the evening, every dance those 200 people would move to, was now standing on Francis Merrow's A, and not one of them knew it. And then Lound did the ordinary thing. He handed out the parts. He went down the stands with the printed music, and he set the sheets on the stands, and Francis, packing her felts away, glanced up as he laid the second violin's part on Pell's stand, not 4 feet from her. She did not mean to look. The eye goes where it goes. She saw the printed page, the neat engraving, the title along the top, and below it 3 lines of notes. And she saw, without wanting to, without being able to help it, 3 notes that were wrong. She had known those 3 notes were wrong for 4 years. A slip of the engraver's hand, a sharp set where no sharp belonged, a note pitched a step high in the 7th bar. A tie left off the phrase's end, so the whole figure limped where it should have soared. Small errors. The kind a busy man engraving a plate makes and never catches, the kind that go out into the world by the 100 and are played wrong forever by people who assume the printer knew better than they did. She had seen these 3 errors before. She knew them the way you know a scar, and she looked away from the page, fast, and closed her satchel, and told herself it was nothing to do with her. Pell picked up the part, and Pell leaned to Lound, and Francis did not hear it, but she saw his mouth move, and what he said was, "Ask her to hum it again." The tuning woman. "I'm telling you, Everard, ask her." Lound frowned and shook his head and lifted his bow, because it was time, past time, and the floor was full and waiting. He gave the down beat, and the first waltz struck up. It rose out of the band bright and lifting into the great room, and the couples came up onto their toes and began to turn, 40 pairs wheeling slow and grand under the swimming light, silk sweeping the chalked floor, and the county of Somerset gave itself over to the dance with a soft collective sigh of pleasure. It was a lovely tune. Everyone thought so. You could see them thinking so, the small smiles, the closing eyes, the way a body gives to a melody it finds it already half knows. It was called The Larksmoor. Francis had written it 4 years ago, at night, above the chandler's shop, in the week her father died. She had never told a living soul. She stood at the side of the room with her satchel on her shoulder, unnoticed, and she watched 200 strangers turn in slow circles to the music she had made out of her own grief, and her face did not move at all. But Thomas Pell was not dancing. Thomas Pell was playing, and he could not let it go. He played the printed part as it was written, the way he had played it 100 times, with its 3 wrong notes, because that is what was on the plate in front of him. But his eyes kept going to the woman standing quiet at the edge of the floor, and in the 7th bar, when he came to the note he had always played sharp because the plate told him to. He did something a hired second violin has no business doing in the middle of a lady's ball. He watched her face, and he played it the other way. He played it as she had hummed it. Natural, not sharp. Right, and Francis Merrow, standing at the side, hearing her own true phrase, come back to her at last out of another man's hands, corrected the way she had corrected it in ink 4 years ago and never told a soul, finished it aloud, under her breath, without thinking. One line of melody, the resolving fall of it, sung soft in the throat of a woman on her feet in a room that was dancing to her. Not a speech, not a stand, just the truth of the phrase, let out at last, because she could not hold it in while she heard it played right for the first time in her life. Pell heard it. Pell was close enough to hear it under all that music, the woman singing the correction that was not on the plate, that was on no plate anywhere in England, that existed nowhere in the printed world. And Thomas Pell took his bow off the strings and stopped playing. The music kept going, but it was wrong now, a waltz with a hole in it where the second violin used to be. Everard Lowndes felt it before he saw it. A leader always does. He turned his head a quarter inch, the way a man does when a floorboard creaks behind him, and there was Pell. Bow down. Off the strings, staring at a woman kneeling by the pedals like she was the only person in the room. Lowndes hissed his name, low, under the strings. Pell did not play. He leaned toward his leader, and he said something no one on the floor could hear over their own dancing feet. He said, she sang the 7th bar. The real one. Lowndes did not understand him. Not yet. He would. Out on the floor, 40 couples turned. They had no idea anything had changed. A ball is a loud thing from the inside, all silk and shoe leather and 40 conversations pretending to be about the weather. They did not hear one violin go quiet. They did not hear a tuner sing 4 notes under her breath. Why would they? She was help. She was furniture with hands. But at the edge of the room, the thing had already started, and it could not be stopped now. Not by Lowndes, not by Francis, not by anybody. Pell put his violin under his arm. He stepped off the low dais where the band sat. He walked, straight across the corner of the floor, between the turning couples, toward the piano and the woman on her knees beside it. A dancer had to swerve. A lady said, well, really, as he passed. He did not stop. He came to Francis, and he crouched down to her level, there on the floor, so he could speak without shouting it to the room. And he asked her the question a 3rd time, the same question from the beginning of the night. But not a whisper now. Madam, that correction. In the 7th bar. Where does it come from? Because it is not on the plate. I have played off that plate for 4 seasons, and it is not there. And you sang it before I played it. Frances did not answer him right away. She was still holding the brass hammer, her father's hammer, the one he'd set in her hand at 9 years old, when her hands were too small to span the pin. She was 31 now. She had tuned 300 pianos she would never be thanked for. And she looked at this jobbing violinist crouched in the middle of a ball he was being paid 2 guineas to play. This man of 20 years in the trade, and she saw that he already knew. He knew, and he only needed her to say it. The dancing was faltering at the edges now. You cannot have a violinist leave the band and cross the floor and kneel by the help without people noticing. A few couples slowed, heads turned. The little sickness of a party going wrong began to spread inward from the walls. And Mrs. Cordelia Draycott noticed. She had spent the whole evening watching this corner like a hawk watches long grass. The hired woman had already kept the county waiting nearly an hour. And now here was one of her own musicians down on the floor, whispering to her. Draycott moved, silk the colour of dark wine, cutting through her guests, her chin up, her voice already loaded. What, she said, is the meaning of this? Mr. Lowndes, is this your man? On my floor? Get him back to his chair. And you, she did not even look at Francis properly, you were paid to tune the instrument, not to conduct a séance beside it. You have finished. You will go. And Giles Ashworth, who had dropped a shilling on the piano lid 2 hours before as if he were tipping a porter, Giles Ashworth laughed, loud enough to be a performance. He was always performing. "Careful, Cordelia," he said. "I think the tuning woman fancies herself a musician. Perhaps she'll favour us with a composition. Something jolly. There's a good girl." And the room laughed. That is the laughter. That is the one the whole night had been building toward. Not one man's snigger. The room, 200 people, the whole of the county's society, packed into the finest ballroom in Bath, and they turned their faces toward the kneeling woman with the brass tool in her fist, and they laughed at the idea. The idea that she could have made anything, that the help could have made the very thing they had all dressed up to dance to. It was the loudest the laughter got all night, and it was the last time it came. Because Frances Merrow stood up. She did it slowly. Her knees were not young, and she had been on the floor a long time. She rose, and she set the brass hammer down flat on the closed lid of the piano, right where the shilling had landed. And she reached down for the satchel on her shoulder, the satchel of worn leather she had refused to let a single footman carry all night, the one nobody had thought about twice. She opened it. Ashworth was still half smiling. He thought this was still his joke. He thought she was reaching for her felts, her spare pins, whatever it is tuning people carry, and that she'd pack up and go, and he'd have won the little contest of the evening. She moved the bundle of ruled paper aside, the old working sheets she never spoke of. She reached past them, and then she thought better of it, and she did not reach past them. She took them out. She laid the manuscript on the closed lid of the piano next to her father's hammer. "You ask me where the phrase comes from," she said. She was not speaking to Ashworth. She was speaking to Pell, only to Pell. Which was somehow worse for everyone else, because a woman who ignores a room's laughter has already stepped over it. "It comes from here." And she began to hum. The theme. The waltz the band had just been playing, that the couples had just been turning to. She hummed it low and true, and as she hummed it she laid one finger on the page on the top line of ink, and she moved it along under the notes so that Pell could see, so that Pell could follow. The sound in her throat and the marks on the paper, the same thing, note for note. Pell went pale. There is no other word for it. The blood simply left his face. He was reading a piece of paper he had never seen in his life, in handwriting he did not know, and it was telling him a half-second ahead of time exactly what she was going to hum. Nobody can fake that. You cannot read music you have never seen and hum it in advance. Either the music is in you, or it is on the page in front of you, and here it was both. "That is her hand," Pell said. He said it to Lound, who had come down off the dais now too. "Everard, look, that is her hand, and that is the tune. That was the first layer." And it was enough to make a working musician go white. But it was not the proof. Frances knew it was not the proof. A person can copy a tune off a printed page and pretend they wrote it. Any clever forger could sit at home and write out a fair copy of a published waltz and date it back and claim it. She knew that. Her father had taught her to think like that. "Never claim what you cannot show," he used to say. Show, or say nothing. So she showed. "Mr. Lound," she said, "you are holding the second violin part. Bring it here. Lay it beside mine." Lound hesitated, but only for a second, because Lound was the leader, and a leader's whole trade is his ears, and his ears had already told him something at the seventh bar. He came forward. He set the printed part down on the lid next to her manuscript. The engraved page. Cream and black R. Harcourt printed clean along the top. And her handwritten page beside it, brown ink gone soft with age. "There are 3 wrong notes on that plate," Frances said. "There have always been 3 wrong notes on that plate. You know them, Mr. Lound. You told me yourself. 4 seasons you've cursed them. The 7th bar, the natural that they engraved as a sharp, the passing note in the second strain that should fall and instead sits. and the last chord of the trio, which the engraver set a third too high because he could not read the copyist's hand. Lowndes' mouth opened. Because she had just named, cold from memory, the 3 exact places on a printed page she was supposedly seeing for the first time. Every player in that band had tripped over those same 3 notes for 4 years and simply learned to play around them. And here was the tuning woman reciting them like a shopping list. "Now look at mine," she said. And there it was. On her handwritten page, in that old soft brown ink, all 3 of those notes stood correct. The natural in the 7th bar, natural, the passing note falling where it should fall. The last chord of the trio sitting a third lower, where the ear wanted it, where it was right. But that was not even the thing. That was not the thing that made Lowndes put his hand flat on the lid to steady himself. The thing was this. On her page, in 2 of those 3 places, you could see where she had corrected herself, where a note had first been written one way and then scratched and set right, in ink that had aged the exact same brown as everything around it, corrections made, and then dried, and then sat in a satchel for 4 years. "You cannot forge that," Lowndes said. He said it quietly, almost to himself. But the couples nearest had stopped dancing entirely now, and the quiet was spreading, and quiet in a ballroom carries further than any shout. "You understand. You cannot forge that. She has corrected the errors here," he tapped her page, "and the correcting is older than the printing. The plate came after. You cannot mend a mistake before the mistake is made. This," he looked up, and he looked around at the guests, at Draycott, at Ashworth, at all of them, and he said it so the room could hear, "This is the original. Everything on that stand tonight came out of this satchel. That was the 2nd layer. And it landed like a dropped tray. You could feel the room turn, not all at once, in pieces." A woman near the window put her gloved hand to her mouth. A man stopped mid-step and forgot to let go of his partner. The band had gone silent to a man, all of them staring now, Pell and Lowndes and the first violin and the cello, at the 2 pages on the piano lid. Mrs. Draycott's face had gone a colour that did not match her gown. "This is absurd," she said. But it came out thin. "Ah, Harcourt is a published composer. His waltzes are sold in every shop in London. You cannot stand in my ballroom and tell me She stopped. She had been about to say a tuner. She heard herself. She stopped. "Ah, Harcourt," Frances said, "is not a person," and she reached into the satchel one more time. "Ah, Harcourt is a name that a music seller called Josiah Sowerby of Cheapside prints on the covers of music he buys outright and puts out under the house. He has a dozen Harcourts. There is no man. There is a printing house and a ledger." She drew out a single folded paper, worn soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded more times than she would ever admit to anyone. "I know this because I sold him the Larksmoor. 8 years ago I began selling him my waltzes. 4 years ago I sold him this one. For 8 guineas. All rights assigned. Signed by my own hand when I was 23, because I needed the 8 guineas, and because that." And here for the first time all night something moved in her voice, just a hairline crack, quickly closed, because that is simply how the trade takes a woman's music. You sell it once, outright, for what a gentleman spends on a coat, and then you spend the rest of your life tuning the instruments other people are praised at. She unfolded the receipt. She held it up. Not high. She did not wave it. She simply held it where Lowndes could read it, and Lowndes read it, and Lowndes nodded slowly, because he had seen 100 of Sowerby's receipts, and he knew the form of them cold. "F. Merrow," he read aloud. "All rights in the work titled The Larksmoor, a waltz. 8 guineas. Received," he looked up. "It is genuine. It is Sowerby's form. I would swear to it." That was the 3rd layer, and the 3rd layer was the one with the blood in it, because now the room understood the whole of it. It was not simply that the tuning woman had written a pretty tune, it was that she had written this tune, and the one before it, and the quadrillas, and God knew how many others. And she had written them alone at night after full days on her knees, and she had sold them for the price of a coat, and it was all legal, and it was all ordinary, and the only reason not one soul in that entire glittering room had ever known her name was a signature on a printer's ledger that the world called perfectly fair. They had been dancing to her for 4 seasons, and the reason they never knew was not a secret. It was a receipt. The whole ball stood still. Frances picked her father's hammer back up off the lid. The brass was warm from the room. She held it the way she always held it, the way her father had shown her, and she looked at Mrs. Cordelia Draycott, who had told her to be quick, who had told her she was keeping the county waiting. "You have been dancing to me all evening, madam," Frances said. Not loud. She never once raised her voice. That was the terrible part, people said afterward. She never once raised her voice. I only came to tune the piano. And there was no laughter anywhere. In the place where the laughter had been, there was nothing at all. Mrs. Draycott, who could dismiss a tuner with 2 words and a turned shoulder, stood in the middle of her own famous ballroom and found that she could not dismiss this. You cannot show the author of the evening to the servant's door. You cannot send the music itself up the back stair. She opened her mouth and shut it. Her whole evening, her flawless evening, the evening built to show off her taste was this woman's work, from the first bar to the last, and everyone in the room now knew it. And she knew that they knew. It was Thomas Pell who moved first. He walked back to the dice. He picked his chair up, actually picked it up, and set it down again nearer the piano, and he sat, and he put his violin back under his chin, and in front of the whole band, in front of every guest who had laughed, he found the 7th bar. And he played it, the natural, not the sharp. Her way. Right, he played the whole phrase through, alone, the true version, the one that had haunted him for 4 seasons off a plate that got it wrong, and he played it slowly and clean, and when he came to the resolving fall at the end, the one she had sung under her breath while the room laughed, he leaned into it. He was the first person in the history of that music to play it in public, knowing whose it was. And when he finished, he lowered the bow, and he did not look at Draycott, and he did not look at Ashworth. He looked at Frances. "Then we have been playing it wrong," he said. "All of us. For 4 years." He turned to the rest of the band. "To Lound. Play it right for her. Come on, from the top. Play it the way she wrote it." It was the plainest thing. A working man, a second violin, nobody in that room would have named an hour before, quietly putting a fellow tradesman back on her feet in front of the people who had knocked her down. And it cost him something to leave his chair and cross a floor and stop a leader's band. He did it anyway. Lound did not sit back down to play. Not yet. Lound did something else first. He reached to his stand and he took up the printed 2nd violin part, the engraved page with R. Harcourt clean across the top, and he turned it face down on the stand. The name to the floor. A small thing, a leader's thing. And then he asked the question that mattered. The only question, really, that a man of business asks when the truth has finally come out and there is nothing left to argue. "Who holds the plates now, madam?" Lound said. "The engraving. The copyright. Who owns the printing of it, as it stands tonight?" "Sowerby," Frances said. "For 4 more years. Then it reverts, and he renews it, and I am paid nothing, and that is the end of it. There is a fresh edition already cut. It goes to the engraver within the fortnight. It will carry the 8-guinea bargain, same as all the rest." "R. Harcourt, 8 guineas. Received, then that edition," Lound said slowly, "is the last one that ought to. And Ashworth. Somebody had to deal with Ashworth. He had gone very quiet in the corner. The chief of the laughers, the young gentleman whose whole want in life was to be found amusing, and he had just watched his best joke of the evening turn into the cruelest thing anyone in that room had ever seen done to a person who did not deserve it. He could not meet her eye. That was his whole punishment, and it was enough. He looked at the floor, at the wall, at his own shoes, anywhere but at the woman he had called a good girl. He mumbled something. It might have been an apology. It had the shape of an apology, low and shamed and swallowed. Frances heard it. She did not soften. "I would rather be paid than pardoned, sir," she said. And she turned from him, that was all. She simply turned her back. And his silence, standing there red-faced with no joke left and no one laughing, that silence was his whole sentence, and everyone understood it, and no one ever needed to say another word to Giles Ashworth about that night for the rest of his life. He had made himself small. She just declined to make him large again. Which left the hostess. Mrs. Cordelia Draycott had 2 debts to pay, and she paid them both in a single stroke, and it must be said she paid them cleverly, because she was a clever woman, only never before tonight a wise one. She did not apologize. Apologizing would have cost her pride and bought Frances nothing. Instead, she did the one thing that humbled her far more and served Frances far better. She commissioned. "I will have a new set from you, Mrs." Draycott said. Her chin came back up. It cost her to bring it up. "For the winter ball. New waltzes. Your own, under your own name printed on the card, so that everyone who dances knows it. A breath. Name your price." And there it was, the door open, the one public minute Frances Merrow had never once been given in 31 years, handed to her in front of 200 witnesses by the very woman who had told her to hurry up and be quiet. And she did not use it for revenge. She did not gloat. There was no speech about all the years and all the 8-guinea bargains and all the men praised at pianos she had made sing. She wanted none of that. Her father had taught her the difference between winning an argument and winning your living, and only a fool takes the first when the second is on the table. "You may keep your applause, madame," Frances said. "Applause costs this room nothing, and I have had a good deal of it tonight without ever being in it. I will tell you my price, and I will tell it to you here, out loud, with Mr. Lowndes and Mr. Merlin, Pell and the whole of your ball to hear it, because a spoken bargain in a full room is a harder thing to break than a signature on a quiet page. I have learned that much." She counted it off, plainly the way her father counted pins. 50 guineas down for the new set. Not 8. 50. A paused to let the figure sit, because everyone in that room knew what 8 had been, and 50 against 8 said everything about the 4 years without her having to. A shilling to me on every printed copy that is sold, for as long as it is sold, and the plates cut and the copyright held, not by Sowerby, not by any house, not under any Harcourt, in my own name. Frances Merrow. Composed by Frances Merrow, on the cover, on the plate, in the ledger. That is the price. That is the whole of it. Lowndes was already nodding. A fair set of terms, he said to the room, as a witness, because that is what a leader is for. I have heard it. We have all heard it. We have all heard it, Pell said. And Mrs. Draycott, in front of the county, agreed to it. She had no choice that would not cost her more, and perhaps at the very bottom of it, under all the pride, she was even a little glad to. It is a strange thing to find out you have good taste after all, and that your good taste has a name, and that the name was kneeling at your pedals an hour ago while you told her to hurry. The wound was never the laughter. Understand that. The laughter healed the moment the room stopped. The wound was the 8 guineas. It had been the 8 guineas for 4 years, and she closed it that night, out loud, standing up, in the very room where a shilling had been dropped on the lid in front of her, and Sowerby's fresh edition, the one already cut and bound for the engraver within the fortnight, would be the very last thing he ever sold with her name kept off it. Frances put her father's hammer back in the satchel. She folded her manuscript. She folded the receipt. She took up the bundle of ruled paper she had never once spoken of, and this time she did not put it back like a thing to be ashamed of. She put it back like stock, like a tradeswoman's stock, which is what it had always been. She went down the front stair. Nobody sent her to the servants' one. Now, 6 months on. It is winter in Bath. There is a new set of waltzes to open the season, and the printed cover on every music stand in the Cavendish Assembly Rooms reads, in plain black letters that no one has to squint at, composed by Merrow. The band strikes up. Pell is on the second violin, and he plays every note the way it is written now, because now the way it is written is right. The couples turn, 40 of them, 50 of them, and this time the room knows whose hands they are moving to. They know her name before the first bar. It is printed under their fingers as they lift the card. The brass tuning hammer does not travel to ballrooms so much anymore. It hangs on a nail. On a wall above a writing desk, in a set of rooms that Merrow rents in her own name, in her own right, the rent paid out of shillings that come in one printed copy at a time. She takes an apprentice now, a girl, 10 years old, quick-eared, the daughter of a woman who mends gloves, and in the afternoons Frances closes the girl's small hand around that brass hammer, the same hammer, and shows her how to feel the pin move under it, the way her own father closed her hand around it when she was 9 and too small to span the block. Josiah Sowerby, of Cheapside, still sells the old edition. He is entitled to. He bought it fair, 8 guineas, all rights, and the law is the law, and she signed it. He still sells it. He simply no longer sets the price on anything new of hers, and there is a great deal new of hers, and the new work carries her name and pays her a shilling a copy and reverts to no one. He sells the old song. He no longer owns the singer. And the ball. The ball that laughed. They dance to her yet. They have merely learned, at last, to say so. That is the whole of it. That the work was always hers, every waltz, every quadrille, every true note under the wrong ones on the plate. Nothing about the music changed that night in the Cavendish Rooms, not one bar of it. The only thing that changed, in the whole of that glittering room full of 200 people, was that they finally learned whose hands they had been moving to all along. So before you go, comment below the name of a woman whose work went out under somebody else's, a grandmother, a great-aunt, a stranger you read about once, somebody who made the thing and never got the name on it. Put her here. Let's get her in the room at last.